Good evening. This is Redwood Wonk, the first time we are airing from the studios here at College of the Redwoods. It's the first time I've actually been in the studio. It's fascinating. They're holding the annual meeting right now outside. You might be able to hear it from time to go, and it's a celebration. If you're interested in it, go to the Access Humboldt website and check it out. But this is where we're at today. So it's kind of exciting. I'm a little nervous. Haven't done this in a long time. It's when I'm in the comfort of my own room, looking out the window, it's a lot easier. But anyway, we'll get used to this. Of course, you are watching Redwood Wonk. My name is Kirk. I'm with Dave Frank. And we're here to talk the national political news of the day. And we're going to start with, well, the biggest political news and probably the most significant is the debate last night in Pennsylvania. There were several debates last night of importance, but they were uneventful. There was the governor's race in Michigan, the Senate race in Colorado, which I don't think moved the needle at all. I think Bennett's going to win that one despite being up against a very good Republican candidate, but just up against the wrong Democrat, wrong incumbent. Yeah. But the key is the one in Pennsylvania between Fetterman and Dr. Oz. This, of course, if Fetterman can pull it off, will be a flip for the Democrats, which would really put a kink into any chances of the Republicans taking the Senate. But as we have discussed on this show, John Fetterman had a stroke shortly, right about as he was winning the primary, so too late to pull out. A lot of people are saying, why didn't he pull out? He couldn't. He's on the ballot. And they had their one and only debate last night. He is recovering from the stroke. A lot of medical people are saying that it's quite an amazing recovery, but he stuttered his lines. Right off the bat, he said, "Good night, everyone," as he was, beginning the debate. I mean, and there is a little bit of a processing issue that probably will be there, may even be permanent. But the doctors and RNs and everybody who are all over the internet today are saying it has no bearing on his cognition. But some of his Democratic critics are saying, "Why did you even agree to this debate? Republicans refused to debate all the time." I think his campaign's feeling was they had to show up. They had to do it. So, Dave, you want to talk a little bit about how it went?
Yeah, sure. So I actually was able to watch it yesterday. Mm-hmm. And so much of the horse race conversation, there's a degree of superficiality about it, mm-hmm. where, it's like a show pony kind of scenario where people are looking at candidates as, do they check all the right boxes? So right. I think Fetterman, if you hold him to that standard of, did he overachieve in any way? And the answer to that is no. I think, but if you look at it from a sympathetic lens, he really just had to show that he had past that threshold of, okay, can he be trusted to process complex thoughts? And I think if you looked on the substantive policy issues from last night, they were actually able to have a back and forth and
yes.
make some real differentiation between their positions.
He was very firm on abortion. He actually got that out really clear after Dr. Oz made probably his biggest mistake of the night.
And commentators have expressed that same sentiment that you just described, that they were finally able to get Dr. Oz, which is funny. We keep calling him Dr. Oz. We don't call him by his name. Mm-hmm. Probably, well,
this is the show. That's his persona.
Yeah, that's his persona, right? But he actually did finally say that it should be between a person, a doctor, and their local political elected officials.
Which is a mistake.
That's a major gaffe, and I think that it plays into where Democrats have devoted so much of their energy and money nationally trying to drum up the base, energize the base to defend what was lost when Roe was overturned. So that I really do think that was a key thing that Fetterman was able to accomplish.
And big, too, because probably the race will be won or lost in the Philadelphia suburbs where women have been known to go back and forth on the races. They tend to be independent. And they're concerned about abortion, but also crime. But this may be something that the Fetterman campaign is hoping to take advantage of. They're already prepping ads around it.
Yeah, and I think, I was watching some coverage where there were like comments popping up and people were hypercritical, almost in a bullying way, of the sort of lack of ability to translate his thoughts into words.
Yes.
And the sentiment was like, that's not fair or appropriate. Let's give him the benefit of the doubt. But I think a lot of folks won't give him the benefit of the doubt, unfortunately. But that's not. I don't think that will be decisive.
Right. Yeah, I don't know either. I mean, it's there may be some undecideds, but it's really from the beginning been all about Democrats turning out their base. If they turn out their base, they get them out. They'll probably be okay. But he was asked about fracking, and that's a real tough question anyway. And he ended up saying it was really jumbled. Well, I support fracking. I don't support fracking. I support don't. It was really confusing. That's the one that went viral and the one the Republicans are playing over and over again. And it makes it look like he didn't have an answer. He did. He just couldn't get it out. He's prepped it, but it's a complicated one. And so while he's trying to explain a complicated position, a complex position, it just didn't work out for him in that. But he clarified, his campaign clarified what their position is afterwards, and and the rest. And it is the one issue that one of a couple of issues that kind of divides him from the typical left. Even though he was a Bernie Sanders supporter, he is ambiguous on fracking.
Being from Pittsburgh, industrial area, a lot of constituents probably rely on that for or at least would agree in principle in it, despite the fact that he is progressive. One thing, getting back to his medical condition, it's called aphasia, and I did see a neurologist comment on it that, look, for any person, when you're in a debate scenario, and that's when you have to be in your A game, being able to be calm and say the things that you actually mean, process the information that you're getting, be nimble. That's one of the hardest things to do cognitively, period, especially in a position of a situation where it's very stressful like that. And especially in such a high stakes place where, like you said, so many people were saying, look, maybe you ought not go out there. But I think that they decided that they should just do one and just let the chips kind of fall where they are. But in that scenario, as described by that neurologist, and then also other supporters of folks with these cognitive problems that post-stroke symptoms, that this was actually very brave and remarkably successful.
And in fact, there was a registered nurse on the radio this morning, I believe NPR, that was saying that she has treated this before, and that this is actually a pretty impressive recovery in the time given. Based his performance, it's so we'll see. It's going to be about selling it. I mean, the Democrats are in a difficult position of trying to educate as much of the public as they can about the disease and about the fact that it doesn't that processing is not cognitive in terms of the ability to understand ideas and synthesize thoughts from them. It's just the communication of it, the intake and the output.
So a couple things come to mind here now too. One is look at how we're talking about the Senate after all. We're talking about the balance of power in the Senate and how Democrats would need to win 2 of the 4 most competitive states, and Republicans would need to win 3 of the 4. We've talked about that on a prior show: Georgia, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Nevada. Those are ultra competitive states here. And to pick up Pennsylvania would be important in this metric here.
Yes.
So that's one thought. But secondarily, besides that, the other piece of this is that as a practical matter, he's the sitting lieutenant governor, Fetterman, and he did have a near 10%, close to 8% lead for a long time leading up into the summer. It got a little bit closer. It got within like 4%, and it's a little bit closer than that now. So as the national investments from dark money pools and other political action committees are really starting to hammer the airwaves with the negative ads and the targeted ads, where they're really trying to move the needle with literally tens of millions of dollars. It just seems that this is going to get into be a real ugly sort of, my prediction anyway, my thought here is that it'll be a pretty ugly food fight. But that, in fact, there aren't too many persuadable people left.
No, it's really about turnout. That's really, at this point, you're not going to persuade a whole lot of new people in very many races. And the elections have been that way for a few years now, where we've got very few people who are kind of on the road on the there. See, and I didn't even have a stroke on the fence.
Yeah.
It's So you need to convince the people. And there's also one thing for Fetterman too. If this does change anything, a lot of early voting has been done already. We'll talk about that in the third segment. But at any rate, this was crucial because it is considered the most likely flip for the Democrats, but everybody is waiting for the polling to see what impact this had, if any. And the thing is most people didn't watch the debate. So you watched it. I only watched the clips afterwards, so I got to see the worst of it, right? Because I was interested in that. Oz apparently came off pretty well, did not come off like a bully. He made mistakes about making comments about that earlier in the race. He's kind of backed off of that, even said he was sympathetic, and the rest, except for that one abortion gaffe, he probably would have sailed through clean. But to say that it's between your doctor and your and you and your local politician. I mean,
it was pretty rough. So two thoughts here, but one about Dr. Oz himself. Like you said, he did perform well for the most part, but he is also got, I think, 13 or so years, many years of experience on television. Yeah. This is what he does. So I looked up his record for the first time, his bio before the debate, and I saw he actually was like president of his class at Harvard and also at medical school, and an athlete.
There's no questions to his intelligence.
Yeah, but the thing is, I didn't realize he had any political experience at all. But apparently, that's his parents were doctors, and he's a bright gentleman. So he was articulate, but not compelling or convincing or charismatic. I don't think that he won any new fans at all, and in fact, it didn't seem like he was that knowledgeable on very many of the things that he spoke about. It was more he had a low bar, and he met it basically. But one other thing I'd like to say is just again as a practical matter, in this Senate we see an awful lot of party line voting, and in fact we mostly see party line voting. Yeah. Very little bipartisan voting. So
on anything important.
Right, right. So when we hear that there's the potential that a Republican sweep of the Senate and the House would result in the Republican agenda getting pushed on the country, but also on the White House and the executive administration, that chances are Dr. Oz, it doesn't matter what his expertise is, he's going to vote with the party. And again, not to presume that, but that's been the pattern in Mitch McConnell's Senate. And then the flip side of that is, well, that's the bar for Fetterman too, and that he is part of his caucus, and that he will get lots of coaching and lots of support. He doesn't have to be, Lincoln out there giving the Gettysburg Address on the regular. He just needs to show up, be thoughtful, and represent his constituents.
Did Oz come across as not being elitist? I mean, that's his biggest problem, is that he's from New Jersey and basically a carpetbagger and, talking about crudité rather than vegetable trays and the rest, and not being able to remember how many houses he owns. But it sounds like they probably, nothing was reported, so I'm assuming he probably ironed all that out of any of his presentation at this point. Didn't brag about going to the tourist trap Philly cheesesteak place.
Right. Yeah, no, there was none of that, the sort of mistakes or slips that would lead one to think that he, was particularly elitist. I do think that he was well trained or rehearsed, coached. He did a pretty good job of returning. Anytime he would go off on a little bit of a tangent or in a little bit of description of a policy preference that he supported, and he was very much out of his element, very not particularly detail oriented or knowledgeable. Right. He did circle back to, I just want to represent everybody. When I went to the four corners of the state, ... Right. He kept coming back to that every every guy kind of thing, even though it seemed like a little bit of a fish out of water, but it wasn't noticeably detrimental in any way to his performance.
Yeah, right, and didn't make the big mistake he did earlier, talking about Fetterman's stroke, where he said, well, he's never eaten a vegetable in his life or something like that. That would have really cost him if he'd done that. So he did it. That was his one chance. Did it move the needle? We don't know. We don't even really know where the needle is because, as we've discussed on the show, I don't think I think there's a good chance that the polls are going to be off this year. This time, that Democrats will overperform because they've overperformed in every special election so far. But a lot of the pundits don't agree with me. They just keep saying, no, this side's probably going to, if anything, they'll still be the Trump factor, which doesn't make any sense because there was no Trump factor in 2018, and he's not on the ballot. So we will see where this goes. Meanwhile, other races are really close, including North Carolina, and that shouldn't even be close. Looks like the Florida polls may have been benefited from the hurricane, but anyway, any last words on this topic?
No, I mean, I think we'll continue to see the polling that will represent opinions from this week. We'll see released probably end of week this week or early next week, and we'll see if that momentum shift that is working in favor of GOP against Democrats, so we'll see how that played out broadly, but specifically in Pennsylvania, people will be watching very closely.
Okay.
I don't think I've made mistakes. I mean, every time somebody says I made a mistake, they do the polls and my numbers go up. So I guess I haven't made any mistakes.
We showed up and we demonstrated that we would not have our voices silenced by a Republican Party that across the country had a singular intention on suppressing the right to vote.
Some Democratic senators seem to imagine they could just break the rules on a razor-thin majority. Nothing would stand between them and their entire agenda, a new era of fast-track policymaking.
The Republican Party moved very far away from reality. And the fact that you got colleagues of mine in the Senate who refuse even today to acknowledge that Donald Trump lost the election. How do you deal with that?
Joe Biden is the president we need right now. Battle-tested, forward-looking, honest and authentic. He has never forgotten who he is fighting for.
Okay, next topic. Pamela Jayapal, hopefully I said that right, even though I keep hearing it. I'm not processing. But she is the head of the Progressive Caucus of the House. And, there was a letter she signed a few months ago that wasn't intended to go out. A lot of interesting theories about how it ended up getting leaked or whatever, or sent by mistake. But the letter basically it almost bordered on being critical of the policy in Ukraine and calling for discussions and possibly implying concessions to end the war, and this was, and it led to a huge fallout. It got released, got sent. People who are opposed to the war, including McCarthy, were seizing on it, saying yes, the left wing of their party, and our party is it's showing a weakening of the support for the policy of Ukraine. A big gaffe. The whole Progressive Caucus has been doing damage control ever since. I think she made a mistake in basically throwing her staff under the bus, but there's something about a possible Quincy people who may have done it deliberately, people who...
Quincy?
Quincy is a reference to some people who are basically opposed to supplying Ukraine, and from a conservative point of view, and they are in the staff apparently. And so, was this a deliberate thing or was it inadvertent? It is odd that she signed it months ago, and that it just went out this week, and it's caused a major issue. And of course, the question is Biden, his policy of supporting Ukraine, losing any ground? Consensus seems to be this was just a mess up, that this was something that the progressives decided they didn't want to send out, and they probably should have destroyed it. But Dave, you want to say anything about it?
Yeah, sure. So for folks who aren't familiar with the content, it basically was a very balanced letter saying, in effect, in addition to the rhetorical and military and economic aid that we are unconditionally giving to Ukraine, that the president ought to include diplomacy and negotiation in the arsenal, because war itself is a very high risk. This war is at very high risk of spreading more broadly across Eastern Europe to our allies, and theoretically a nuclear event,
right.
whether it's tactical or accidental or all the things that could be happening that are pretty awful. So there were 30 of the progressive caucus members of the Democratic Party who signed on around June and July era. Mm-hmm. And I guess the idea was that, of course, there's a lot of peacenik, we'll call it, for lack of a better word, energy. Right. People that are just thinking to themselves, war at all costs ought to be checked by someone in the party. And it just seems like whether it's President Washington or President Eisenhower, our country has a tradition of generals who are up on the front line reminding people that war is hell. Yeah. And so the timing really was what was called into question here. Why was it released? And what exactly happened? The criticism, one of the main criticisms, I think, was that, look, this is the position of Minority Leader McCarthy, and that his Republican Party constituents are challenging the president on all fronts, and this should not be politicized because of the nature of Russian aggression, Russian war crimes, etc. So,
and it put him at odds with McConnell, who's deep into the military-industrial complex and the security state, and so this way they could sort of maybe diffuse it a little bit if it was a deliberate thing, so that say, well, the Democrats are divided too, right?
Yeah. So the timing on that was just really terrible. Mm-hmm. And then there's actually the backstory. I think the backstory is really the more sensational element here. And all that, I guess, investigation is yet to be determined, but the preliminary things we've started to hear about include that it was, quote, like you said, an accident, that it was not fully vetted, and that while the draft was getting circulated for potential release, I think the date on it was August 1st, they were originally intending to release it, but that it wasn't ready for prime time, and that they did not have true buy-in from all of the members. And then so in that sense, well, if 30 people, they got to that critical mass, they wanted to wait till they had that many people who were willing to go along with it, but that they were in fact changing versions. There was edits to it that were made that were supposed to account for the developments that have been happening, maybe more overtly acknowledging, I'll just call it war crimes and unspeakable hostilities and aggression, but also that neither party is really in a position to concede at this point, that Putin is saying certain things that lead everyone to believe he's not going to negotiate, and also ultimately putting Ukrainians first, and the opinions and the decisions about the sacrifice and engagement should come from Ukraine. So if Ukraine's not ready to negotiate and Russia's not ready to negotiate, then the consensus in the United States is we'll continue. Apparently, that will continue indefinitely on our current path. So I think the question is was it a little tone deaf to release it now, and was it intentional? So we'll see how that all plays out.
We'll see how it plays out. I mean, it's interesting timing because the HIMARS, the long-range, very accurate rockets that the United States gave to the Ukrainians, have apparently turned the tide. I mean, maybe not just them. There's a lot of other things that happened, but the Russians have had to fall back and are continuing, as of today, to lose ground in the east. The Ukrainians are getting closer to Kherson. There's a lot of aerial satellite shots of ferries going in and out of, I think it's the Dnipro River, I may say it. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, that from Kherson to Crimea. And they're not sure if ferries are bringing reinforcements or evacuating, but it does look like that Kherson is expected to fall sometime before it gets really bad in winter. And where does that leave Putin? Well, obviously, they needed some kind of win. Now, I'm not saying they've got agents in Congress or anything like that. But I'm just saying that there is a lot of political intrigue around the timing here, because clearly Ukraine is in the process of, if it continues much longer the way it's going, if something doesn't turn it around, of pushing Russian troops out of the country entirely. And they discovered some papers that just came out today. It was reported, I think, NBC, that there were papers that acknowledged the Russian command had to leave sooner. They were desperately trying to put a lot of papers into the fireplace, and some of them survived. And what they indicated was that about two major units, indicating about a fourth of the original force that invaded the country, was gone. Wow. And was either defunct or either killed, deserted, surrendered, whatever. But they just aren't there according to these papers that weren't supposed to be done. So Ukraine has the advantage. But I think a lot of the speculation is, well, if Putin holds out till January, will McCarthy jam up funding and prevent replenishment of the HIMARS? Probably he won't. I think he'll wimp out once he's there. I think this is pandering to that sort of America First base and the rest. But it is a concern.
Yeah, this is one of those scenarios where at least I often point to three-dimensional chess, where there's a lot of different things going on at the same time. We are in an economic crisis for the most part that's sort of unstated, but actually happening, with inflation everywhere so high, food costs, energy costs real high. Other countries are experiencing both, depending on whether you're talking about developing countries on the food side or Western Europe on the energy side. Countries are experiencing massive pain right now, and I think keeping the morale of the Western alliance together is arguably one of the highest priorities now for the White House. And so,
especially with the energy crunch coming up with winter.
Exactly.
A lot of European countries are worried about that.
And we see, for example, in UK, granted it's its own unique situation, but they do now have a new prime minister. So that there's one of the shortest on record, in part because of the economic tone deafness of the administration that didn't last very long.
Yeah.
But so one thing that I think is really important here, as I was talking about,
we'll see how long this one lasts.
Right. Well, this guy's got a lot of supporters.
I think
though.
so.
Yeah.
A little more together.
But there's this Russian concept. It translates to disinformation, and I would argue that Russia and Putin that's been their bread and butter lately. Yeah. They're doing the best in the fictional narrative that they're projecting, and from their own perspective, I would argue that they somehow think maybe that they're successful in this misinformation and disinformation. It's probably not true, but that's what they seem to think. And so to hear from our progressive Democrats that there's some divisions at home, and that we would let the cost of solidarity with Ukraine be a divisive element within our Congress, that just it really does. That crack is a strength from that perspective. So that was one of the the mainstream Democrats, the establishment Democrats. That was one of the main things that came out in the public in the last 24 hours, whatever or so. That how could you possibly do this right now? This is you are stooges to Putin. That whole narrative.
Right.
But that's knee-jerk and reactionary. I don't think that's necessarily something that's going to persuade any progressives who believe in peace. That that's not why they're talking about peace. And I would say one last thing before I finish here. You've got economists like Jeffrey Sachs out there saying, world-renowned, saying things like, you need to realize that we have to think about peace. And you've got other people like Tulsi Gabbard who is publicly almost ostentatiously left the Democratic Party recently, and is saying that it's because they are not really minding the House properly on this Ukraine issue. So there's this division within the country on how to best talk about Ukraine and talk about authoritarianism versus democracy, and so even when you see experts out there, when you see Congress members out there that are saying things that are divisive, I think that's part of the reason why it was so. The progressives pulled back that letter. They rescinded that letter within 24 hours. I saw Ro Khanna out there, though, and he made an articulate argument in favor of it, basically.
Sure.
But he's rare.
But he's again, it's the timing and the messaging and how you do it. This was not how they planned to unroll it.
Right.
That way. So they probably wanted to wait till after the election. I don't think this is going to have any effect on the election whatsoever. It's a little esoteric, but it's. But you know, you're right. At times with Tulsi, who is now backing Kerry Lake and the general in New Hampshire, you know, those kind of the crazier Trump candidates, and Kerry Lake's probably going to win. But it just was bad timing for the Progressive Caucus. It makes them look like amateurs for one thing, and they definitely need to clean that up and find out exactly how that happened and try not to let it happen again. I mean, a lot's going on here. You know, you've got inflation, this issue, you know, and Democrats out on a message trying to, you know, it's hard to argue that they're doing stuff for it, but actually in the United States, it's not that bad compared to other industrialized countries. It's really done well, but you can't say that. It's because people are hurting. You can't say, well, I'm doing you know, better job than they are in England and Italy. You know, you got to say, you know, I'm doing what I can, and a lot in the news too. I mean, you know, that broke out today. OPEC, the Prince of Saudi Arabia, complaining, accusing the countries that are releasing their reserves of manipulating the market. I mean, Crimea River, right? You know, this is because OPEC last week had planned to cut down, and this was aggravated everything from inflation to the stock markets across the world, and the rest. So you've got all of this stuff going on. The Democrats just feel like they need to be on message and not be off message, and especially with the way the polls have moved. I actually don't think the polls have moved all that much at the Senate level. You know, a few races here and there, but I actually don't. You know, I'm looking at it's not a big deal. And as we discussed last week, Biden's approval ratings are up. It's this weird combination of things. It's like his approval ratings go up, the Senate candidates goes down. His are down, theirs are up. There's no connection like there used to be. And that might be good news for the Democrats because it does suggest that there are some voters out there that are not party oriented.
Yeah, I think just rough math says that the people who are sort of entrenched in their either, you know, R or D column, very few of them are willing to break out of that.
Yeah.
I think it was like 4% of Democrats willing and 10% of Republicans willing, or something like that.
Sure.
It was minimal, and that's like ever. You know, that's like a longitudinal study. So it's very few people cross party lines. It's really the question of turnout, and that's
our next segment.
Yeah, truth. And so I would just say this about this topic, because it is you know, to War and Peace. It's an existential question that it's. I don't know if you alluded to this or said it overtly, but I think Pramila Jayapal came out and sort of backed off it in a way, saying like, well, a staffer released this, and it was unvetted.
You don't blame stuff on your staff, even if they're blameworthy.
Yeah, but then in Politico, there was one, you know, sort of anonymous source. We'll see if this plays out. But that, well, look, she signed it. Like she
exactly.
Yeah, like
she put her pen to the ink and didn't have it destroyed afterwards. If it wasn't, again, it was probably released early.
Yeah.
Anyway, well, you know, we'll see if there's any fallout, but I have a feeling by next week we won't even be thinking about this.
Yeah.
Tonight I stand before you, tested by adversity, made sensitive by hardship, a fighter by principle, and the most optimistic man in America.
I didn't make it in life because of my athletic prowess. I didn't make it because I'm a genius. I made it because I worked hard.
There are known knowns. There are things we know we know. We also know there are known unknowns. But there are also unknown unknowns. The ones we don't know, we don't know. It is the latter category that tend to be the difficult ones.
When I hear your new ideas, I'm reminded of that ad. Where's the beef? Yeah.
And the client asks you a question. How do you guys get comfortable? It's a question. So, what was your answer?
Mr. Chairman,
did you tell him?
Sure, Mr. Chairman, I'm just trying to understand.
No, I think you understand it. I don't think you want...
All right, our last segment, we're going to discuss turnout, as of course this is really crucial. Both sides need to turn their people out, especially the Democrats. Historically speaking, if there's a high turnout, it tends to benefit Democrats. There have been some exceptions, the Schwarzenegger election, a few other things, but the turnout so far is in their favor. Now, before we get into that in detail, there's a caveat, because normally it's up until 2018, actually 2020, it was Republicans who voted early. Definitely locally here, I've worked on several campaigns where we're on the phones, and the minute the ballots go out, you start trying to call the Fortuna and all of the elderly people there. It's like, too late, Sonny. I already sent it out today. They were the same day they received their ballots. Not anymore, because of the strange politics we don't have to go into too much, but Donald Trump discouraged people from voting early because he had a strategy, post-election strategy, which continues to this day. And so to this day, there are a lot of Republicans out there, it's become a partisan thing, who think that voting by mail is encouraging fraud, ballot harvesting, blah, 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 and so they aren't voting as early. So when we see these leads in Democrats, you have to understand that the Republicans will catch up, probably. I mean, maybe not catch up totally, but most of them will vote on election day. However, these are votes you can bank. One of the big problems Democrats have always had is getting the turnouts. And particularly in California, where we have mail-in ballots, and Pennsylvania, it's given the Democrats a lot of advantages and in ways that have actually impacted the polls. And the polls were abysmal with regard to last year's recall election. They project the 538 average had it between anywhere from losing by or the no vote losing by 2 points to winning by 5 points, and the final differential was 20 points. Oh wow! And so why? Because I think 538 and nobody. It's all new, but it's a lot easier to organize to get people out. It's harder to get people to polls on election day than it is to say, hey, you've got a ballot sitting probably on, the table near your door or on, wherever you put your mail. Would you mind opening it up and, filling it out, voting for a candidate and sending it off? And it's a lot easier to do that, and people who, especially who are busy on election day. We've heard stories of people who say, I went to work, had to go pick up my kids, got there, drove back around, the lines were so long, I was just too tired, it's not going to come down to my vote, and it's hard to do that. And the Republicans are kind of taking a chance by not having it. But there is high turnouts in California. We're at 7%, higher than we were in 2018 at this point in time. And though not a lot of young people. Young people tend to like to vote late and on election day. So, how much is there an election day cavalry for the Republicans? It depends. But anyway, it's up in North Carolina, it's up in Pennsylvania, it's up in Georgia, record numbers in Georgia. And this, in general, is good news for the Democrats. Not as good as it might look, because, that so many more registered Democrats are there, but you want this if you're a Democrat.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're talking about the generic sort of, the general topic of just turnout. Mm-hmm. And so just for like a baseline, so people kind of get a sense of where we're at, up until the last two cycles, so the 2020 presidential cycle and the 2018 midterm cycle. Before that, on average, you would see about a 60% turnout nationwide during presidential cycles and close to a 40% turnout on mid-year cycles. But any of the other like first week in November elections can be much, much lower. So there are local races around the country, for example, where 20, 30% are more common. And in fact, I think I saw there was a mayor of a major city that once elected with single-digit turnout. So just depends on if the election is occurring in some off day. But we're focused more on the presidential cycle and the midterm cycle, which is what we have coming up in the next 2 weeks, the midterms. And so let's look at the last two real briefly. in 2020, we saw close to like 67% turnout, which is a marked spike. There were a lot of people participating. And in the midterm prior to that, it was like around 60%, 50% rather. So still, it's a huge, huge jump from 40.
Yeah.
And so people are engaged. And with, you mentioned, you talked about mail-in voting as one way to make it a little bit easier. You don't have to show up. You don't have to take a day off from work. You don't have to get the day right or the time right. It just sits in your mailbox, for a few weeks or months, and then I think a month before Election Day, and then you could just get it out at your leisure. Well, we've got the state of Oregon and the state of Utah with 100% mail-in voting.
Right. Yeah.
And
you don't even have the option of going to
the Republicans are set to do really well in both states.
Yeah.
So the way that they are professing that there's some correlation between an enthusiasm for mail-in ballots and cheating or corruption, I've heard it described. It's not voter suppression. This sort of this almost psychological warfare that's being waged against small d democracy. It's voter depression. They're depressing the vote through things like drawing into question the validity of certain techniques or ways to express yourself. So, for example, those voting drop boxes.
Yes.
We're talking about how evil these voter drop boxes are.
Yeah. I think Rubio was worried a bomb could be dropped.
He said that during the debate.
It's ridiculous. Yeah.
I had never heard anybody say that, but Senator Rubio, who's Mr. Foreign Policy Guru, and some of the things he says are actually pretty articulate.
And you've got
sometimes, but not that one.
Open carrying around the boxes and following people after they voted.
Right.
I mean that.
Arizona, that just happened.
Yeah,
right?
that just happened, and the rest. So yeah, this is definitely a big issue, and the question is if California is higher, and I ran into one Cervantes last night. He said, yeah, it's really high, it's really busy. I don't know, it's that way, and if it happens in Southern California, there are several Republican seats that currently Republican that will likely flip if they can get those votes out. If you look at the statistics, Latinos are lagging way behind the other groups, but they also tend to vote on Election Day a lot, like young people and now Republicans. So it's they were expecting again the same day voting cavalry for the recall election, and no, because the Latino vote offset the Republicans who hadn't voted yet, and the young people too.
Yeah.
So it's just, and as we know, the registration is up. Yeah. Registration of young women is hitting record numbers because of the Dobbs decision.
Right.
So and as when we discussed that, I believe there's going to be a Dobbs effect this year.
Yeah.
So it's good news for Democrats. It's not clear cut that this is completely in their favor, but more Democrats are voting, and we'll see. It's definitely not bad news for the Democrats. They want the high turnouts because it's usually the party loses in the midterms that's in power, the presidential power, because a lot of their people don't vote. They say, we don't need to vote. We're in power, right?
It's true.
But it doesn't seem to be that way this time. The Dobbs decision and a few other factors, as well as the polarization. It means everybody turns out. And if everybody turns out, that's in the Democrats' favor because there are more Democrats than there are Republicans, and more Democratic-leaning independents than Republican-leaning independents. And in California, it could be a blowout.
Yeah, I think there's talk of about 5 seats that are up for grabs in Southern California, which would be a big, go a long way towards offsetting the traditional swing that we've talked about, which could be 40 to 60 seats. So if you're able to claw back 5, then that's, of course, a big chunk of that right there. I think it's worthwhile mentioning 2 things here. Again, that seems to be my theme today. But one is, it goes against the Aristotelian 3 things. But so the 2 things, one is we're seeing that the response so far is comparable to a general election year. So the pace, the 2 million votes that have been received across the country, at this point, that's about the pace of the 2020 cycle, not the 2018 cycle.
Right, the presidential cycle.
Yeah, the presidential cycle. So rather than see that drop-off, that's significant. To go from 60 to 40, that's a third. That's a big drop-off. But so that's on average over a long period of time. But we're seeing people right up at that 60, which actually we're comparing it to the last one, which is 67. So we're seeing huge turnout. But it's not just the general number, the average number, because sometimes that can be deceiving. Like you said, when you look at it at a state-by-state level, in many cases you see there's a little bit of a discrepancy. If you look at these crosstabs, there's a breakout where women are more reliably voting than men. And then there's a sort of a generic, if you break it out by racial ethnicity background, I think it goes like white, Latino, black, and then so there's been some trends over time that in fact are actually we're seeing the underrepresented voices really coming out in a big way.
Yeah.
And so it's just across the board. It's not just concentrated at that typical high activity voter, which I guess theoretically is a high socioeconomic status. White woman would be the highest category. Yeah. They vote most reliably, but we're
elderly too.
I forgot that part. The older you are, young people they're at a big disadvantage in participation too. Yeah, so we're seeing across the board rise and multiple states, and that's a really good sign.
Yeah, well, for instance, the elderly over 60 or over 55, I forget what category, accounts for like half of the votes in California so far voted.
Wow.
Now, there's a lot of reasons for that. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're more engaged, although they tend to be, but also because they probably are the ones that are least likely to want to show up at an election ballot, with what has happened with the pandemic, just out of habit.
Yeah.
So, there are a number of factors that way, and we'll see. But again, the organizing models around this, I don't know that likely voters, the current models of likely voters apply in states with this. We'll find out. We will have data with all of the elections, and you can't really tell with primaries elections, because it's all within one party, so people in a party aren't necessarily motivated in the same way and the rest. But again, that Kansas vote, that blew me out of the water, and yet they're talking about it like it's an anomaly. But every special election, I'm saying on broken record, every special election that has come down since the Dobbs, Democrats outperformed. This is not bad news for them at best. At worst, in terms of that. And but again, there's a lot of things that can happen. We still have 2 weeks left, and still a lot of people who haven't voted yet.
Right, and there's still, this is something that I'll talk about a little bit in my prediction. But there's still 2 weeks to go,
right?
And anything can happen when it comes to significant events that get people's attention, or the ability for targeted communications that were attempting to sway folks. And obviously the obvious one people talk about is that the letter when Clinton ran against Trump, the Comey letter came out at the 11th hour.
Yeah, there'll be usually October surprises. The optimal time is Thursday before the election, because that's the most time for it to sink in, but not enough time to really get an effective response out.
Gotcha.
Probably not as big a factor anymore now that so many people are voting before that, right? But definitely that last week before the elections, you always look and say, okay, who's got what's going to come out, what's going to get leaked to the media, what's going to break, and the Comey letter, was a big deal. Gore almost pulled it out when the drunk driving thing was released on the Thursday. We've had, but we've already had a few, of those surprises. I don't think the thing we talked about in the last segment really counts as an October surprise. I don't think it's going to have much of an effect, if any, on the election. If Graham doesn't open his mouth again about a federal, bars on abortion, that'll probably, overload. Although I'm sure it's on ads all over the place.
Yeah, I was thinking a little bit about this, and I didn't say it in the last segment, but the question of the timing, this October surprise concept. I think this is around the time when the recriminations start to fly, where people who are fearful of losing or being held to account for underachieving in the election, and that starts to fly. And what we're starting to see is people questioning the consultancy class, the political advisory class, about their messaging. particularly when we're talking about Democrats here. And so people were wondering if there was people were starting to use the term malpractice for the messaging that was happening, and it was getting, starting to get a lot of traction, I think. And so in part, this may have been a way to just knock people down a peg or reinforce one side's standing in their own internal circular crossfire.
Well, we talked a few weeks ago about the debate as to whether or not the Democrats' closing argument should be abortion or economy, and it's like, first of all, you don't have to choose between the two. There's no, people, not everybody is ADD like me, where I like to focus on one thing at one time. People can hear two issues, but Bernie Sanders is right that they weren't really talking about what they have done towards inflation, the things that they've passed, the obstruction, and the rest, and they are starting to get that message out. We'll see if it makes a big difference. But Bernie won that debate because that's when the polls started to move. So
true enough.
So. Okay, well, this brings us to our last part, which is our predictions. Dave, what do you got?
I'll try to keep it pretty short. So a lot of what we talked about today is the messaging that Democrats were using in their electioneering efforts in the closing days, and also the polling swing trending in the direction across the various races in both the House and the Senate towards the GOP, and recriminations about mismanaging the messaging. There's tons of money still to be spent. Like I said, dark money and political action committees. I really think we're going to start to see people start to use fear. I think the Democratic messaging is going to say, listen to what the Republicans are saying they're going to do if they win. They look like they're going to win. Medicare and Social Security are in jeopardy. I think if you hit that third rail really hard, you stop that momentum. And I think someone is smart enough out there to hear this, know this, and implement this in terms of messaging in the last 2 weeks.
A few Republicans have actually helped them out on that. All right, I'm going to make an election prediction. This is real important in the battle for the House. But in Alaska, Mary Peltola is going to hold on to the seat that she won just recently against Sarah Palin. Palin and the rest are still in the race. The polls are not looking good for the Republicans there. Murkowski and Peltola have mutually endorsed each other and are saying they're going to vote for each other in the first round. You've got ranked choice voting. Republicans are whining about that rather than trying to strategize around it. Maybe they are, but they're still whining anyway. Mary Peltola, that's going to be one House race that they don't get back, and that will be a net flip for the Democrats. Anyway, that's all the time we have for this time around. We will be discussing these issues. We got 2 more weeks to the election. Actually, only 1 more show, I think.
Yeah.
So that'll be next week. Until next time, let's see if I don't choke on this. Stay informed and stay engaged.